Good. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Coffee and Soil Tests. This is the Allen County Soil and Water Conservation District, and my name is Mike Worthing, a technical specialist agronomist with the SWCD and a conservation advocate at home on my farm. We are recording this presentation for later viewing. Please have audio on mute unless talking, and we can use the chat. We will be monitoring that. Today we have James Wolff, Ag and Natural Resources Educator with Purdue Extension, and I believe the office director there. And he's going to explain how to take and interpret soil tests and what all them numbers mean on the test. So, James, would you like to jump in and start our conversation?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and start by sharing the screen here. So yes, as Mike said, I'm James Wolff. I'm the Agriculture and Natural Resources Educator, and I get an additional title of also being the County Extension Director here in Allen County. I'm going to go ahead and leave my camera off today because my internet is a little slow. But that'll help you see the presentation as we go through here. So hopefully maybe I'll stop a couple times just to make sure we don't have too many questions or get too far along between questions. But we're going to try to help you understand your soil test results today. So I think we covered soil testing a few weeks ago or a few months ago, and now we're just going to go over how to understand those results once you get them back. Maybe. There we go. So when you get your soil test results back, you may get something that looks like this. Sometimes it's a little bit more graphical in display. But you're going to have like a bunch of numbers and just kind of sample IDs and different things going on. This is an example where we've obviously got 10 different samples from an area, but you could have as few as one sample on there. It just kind of depends. And again, depending on the lab that you use, your results that you get back are going to look slightly different, but they're all going to include roughly the same information on all of the sheets, just maybe in a different format or a different table layout. And this is why, especially if you're doing more than one sample, it's good to make sure that you label your samples so that you understand them. Yes, saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is great, but when you get your results back, if you don't know where sample 1 was taken, that then does you no good. And that kind of, ruins the whole concept of doing soil tests. So make sure that you label it in a way that you understand. I know A&L Labs here in town will let you use up to, I think, 10 characters, either letters or numbers. They're going to give it their own number. So you'll see here the lab number is next to that sample ID. So the lab will give it its own number that they're going to reference. But for your purposes, you want to make sure that you're labeling it in a way that you're going to understand, especially if you're doing multiple soil samples in an area. For myself, my yard, I just put front and back to label it so I know which one's which. I've done some, especially people that have maybe multiple fields or multiple plots, because our urban areas are vacant lots. Sometimes I'll just put the address number and the maybe the first couple letters of the road or the street, so that we're able to locate where those samples go. The first thing that we're going to come across when we look at that sheet, and this is again looking at how A&L Labs lays their form out. That's what we typically see because it's the closest lab. You're going to find the organic matter. That organic matter is just basically trying to identify what percentage of plant material and animal residue is within that soil. And generally, you can kind of see this visually with your soils in the coloring of the soil. Organic matter tends to add a darkness to the soil. It's kind of that black, the blackness in that soil. So usually if we've got a higher organic matter, you're going to see a darker soil color. I say that usually, just like anything else, there's always exceptions and always weird things that happen within our soils. But generally, when you're looking at your soil, the darker color is going to be a higher organic matter, lighter colors tend to be lower in organic matter. Here we're looking at percentages that range from 1.1 all the way up to 2.8. When we get into garden settings, lawn settings, some of that urban agriculture, these numbers do creep up higher. But in field settings, this is usually about where we see for row crops, what we're seeing as numbers, and that's probably what this example is. Also, again, keep in mind, like organic matter, a lot of people really like organic matter and think, oh, we just need to add a whole bunch of organic matter. But keep in mind, that's just one piece of the puzzle. Adding too much organic matter may not really solve your problems. Just blindly utilizing compost isn't necessarily going to solve your problems. It is a piece of the puzzle, but it's not the total piece of the puzzle. So it is one thing to kind of watch and keep in mind with that organic matter percentage. The next thing you're going to come across is the phosphorus levels in your test. So there's different methods that are used to sample phosphorus. There's two different numbers usually listed with the Bray method, but there is a newer method that the labs are starting to switch to. So sometimes they use a conversion rate to get you back to the Bray because their formula uses Bray. And generally, like phosphorus is going to be something we're looking for because it's used in getting seedlings started. It's used to promote root growth. So usually we're going to see phosphorus more so in when we're starting plants, when we're doing that initial planting, but we're not going to need it so much once the plant's established and later in the season. And here again, it gives us nice phosphorus levels. Once we get into the nutrients, the lab here does a good job of trying to label. You'll see that little VH or H next to the number. That just means that it's VH stands for very high. The H stands for high, and I think there's an M in there. So M stands for medium, which kind of tells you relatively within your soil, is that 90 high or is that 90 low? In this case, with phosphorus, generally, we consider things over 30 to be in that high range. Actually, it looks like maybe the cutoff is maybe about 45 in that high range. We really want to shoot for most. I think phosphorus is a level of 30 for corn and soybeans. And these, again, like I'm used to row crops, so I rattle off those numbers a lot easier. But if we're in vegetable production, we would look up and see where we want to have that ideal target range of phosphorus to be. But really, phosphorus outside of that seedling or new plant, we don't need a whole lot. We generally just try to maintain numbers within our soil. Across, we'll also get potassium. So when you think of the big three nutrients that we usually use, which are N, P, and K, this kind of is the first two. We're looking at the most important things first. So the phosphorus and the potassium, the P and the K are the first two numbers we see on our chart. The higher values are needed in clay soils. We tend to have some more clay in our soils around here. So higher values are needed because clay is going to hold on to potassium really well. So when we look at these numbers, most of these numbers are in the high range. We do have a couple that are very high, but you're going to notice that these numbers are much higher than what we'd see with the phosphorus levels. And usually potassium is used for kind of water regulation and reproduction. So if you're growing leafy greens, you may not necessarily need as much potassium. But because you're not getting them to a reproductive stage, but if you're growing things like tomatoes, squash, corn, soybeans, things that are going to be reproducing and you're trying to get that seed or that fruit, then potassium becomes more of a concern because we're wanting to promote reproduction within the plant. As we continue across, we're going to kind of enter the pH area of our soil sample results. So magnesium and calcium are going to be the next two numbers that we see as they're reported. And these are closely tied to that pH, especially the calcium really is a big factor in that pH. That's why we typically say when you're too acidic to lime your soils. Because lime is calcium, but magnesium also kind of works in there. So sometimes using that, you can kind of see there's slight color differentiation if you notice deficiencies in these. So sometimes you need to add magnesium instead of calcium, but generally calcium is going to be used to correct pH issues. Again, you're rarely going to see deficiencies when you've got the correct pH. Just because plants are able to grab what little they need from there. And generally, we want to keep that magnesium at above 50 parts per million. So you see a couple of these samples are getting down to 90. So we might want to watch those and just kind of keep that in mind. But generally, just above 50 parts per million on the magnesium. So the next thing is to look at your pH. The pH is the next important one across here. The level of acidity is your pH. And most of our plants prefer a pH in the 6 to 7 range. That is where the vast majority of our nutrients become available in the soil. So if, for instance, you've got really high nutrient levels, but your pH is off, that kind of changes the ability of the soil to release the nutrients, the ability of the plants to find those nutrients and take them up. So you could have a really great nutrient level, but because the pH is off balance, the nutrients are no longer available in the soil for the plant to take up. So getting that correct pH is really vital. The one difference, again, most plants fall in the 6 to 7 range. We do have differences. So blueberries prefer something a little bit more acidic. So they prefer to be under 6 or right at 6 on their pH. Whereas things like alfalfa tend to be a little bit more closer to that 7 range on the higher end of the spectrum. Which is why we generally try to add lime and keep our pH balanced high with alfalfa. And then we also want to keep the pH low with our blueberries. That means that around here, blueberry production is going to be very difficult. Everybody's like, oh, we'll just go get blueberries. Most of our home lawn samples that I see, so garden and lawn samples, I don't know that I've seen one come in that had a pH lower than about 6.8. Generally, they're averaging about 7.4 for a pH, which is really high. Definitely do not need to add lime in that situation. We actually need to kind of bring that down a little bit. But you're also not going to be very successful with blueberries. My recommendation would be to get a pot and find some more acidic soil and start a little fresher with your soil in a pot if you really want to grow some blueberries. But that pH is really going to kind of tell us where those nutrient levels are and what's available within that soil. Next is a really fancy number. We call it the cation exchange capacity, which is the CEC. It's basically a measure of how well the soil holds nutrients. Clay soils tend to have a much higher CEC. So again, that's why we talked about in clay soils, we need a higher level of potassium, and that's because the clay soils hold on to nutrients a little bit more. Whereas when we get down to those lower numbers, like our sandy soils tend to have the lowest exchange capacity. So those are gonna, again, we need to put more nutrients into those soils. They're not gonna hold nutrients very well. And then sometimes those are going to be, again, I'm just going to kind of go back here for a second. That is basically the top row of your soil sample results. That's going to kind of make up the largest portion of what maybe a normal soil sample test you get back is. It's going to include that organic matter. It's going to include the phosphorus, the potassium, the magnesium, the calcium, your pH, and then your cation exchange capacity. And then you'll notice, again, if I go back, you'll also see across here, sometimes they give you a percentage of that nutrient within that sample, just as some comparisons, which again, they're just kind of overloading you with numbers. The biggest things to pay attention to are the phosphorus, the potassium, soil, cation exchange, and this organic matter up front. Those are going to be the most helpful to somebody that's in a small farm situation, a lawn garden situation, somebody that's just trying to manage their soil fairly well. When you really get into all the sciencey stuff of the soil, that's when all these other numbers come into play. But they're a little bit more difficult for a homeowner to manage and adjust some of those. Oops. The last portion, sometimes people will go ahead and get a micronutrient test. In my opinion, micronutrients, they might be good to maybe if you're first time getting a soil sample to get a baseline value for these. Or if you're seeing nutrient deficiencies within your plants, those would be the two times that I really say, yeah, go ahead and get the micronutrient test because it usually does cost a little bit more money on top of your other nutrients. They're going to be very trace amounts, so it's not like we're really adding a whole lot to anything. Again, looking at your sulfur and your zinc. I mean, you're down at single digit parts per million. Boron, you're at 0.6 parts per million. Whereas our other numbers, we were up there talking about 50 to 1,000 parts per million on those nutrient values. So that's when they become more important. But micronutrients are just needed in trace amounts, really, unless you're seeing deficiencies or you've got a specialty crop that really needs some of that nutrient. It's not as important to test for that. Boron would be an example in alfalfa. Alfalfa does prefer some boron. Also in soybeans, I've seen the manganese and iron deficiencies. We'll also notice iron deficiencies with oak trees, maple trees. Sometimes they get some of those iron deficiencies. Becomes noticeable in the change of the color in the leaves. So just trying to, again, think about what your needs are as to how you're going to look at that. Since I haven't really seen anything pop up in the chat yet, I'm just going to kind of go ahead and move forward. So again, we've got all these numbers. We're looking at all this. How do we determine what's going on? So here's another example. This is a little bit more graphical. This one is actually probably my sample, but you'll notice here It's a little bit more graphical, not as many numbers because it's one sample, one printout per sample. We can kind of see those numbers coming across here, slightly different layout than before, but we still have the numbers. I did not get a micronutrient test for this one, but down here it gives you a graphical summary so you can kind of see where these numbers fall within the ranges. You'll notice that my phosphorus is pretty low in my yard. Again, a lab may tell you up. Sometimes the lab is just looking at making sure we're maintaining certain levels of nutrient within the soil. Unless I notice a nutrient deficiency within my lawn, I generally don't try to keep those numbers too high. Most established lawns don't need really any phosphorus. The focus is mostly on nitrogen. So that is, again, this graphical display. Down here at the bottom, then it tells me what I need to add. And it's telling me in a lawn, they do it in pounds per 1,000 square feet. If you're talking about a cornfield, they're usually going to tell you in pounds per acre. But in a small setting, a garden setting, they're going to give you 1,000 square feet as the area that you're spreading on. And one thing, I think I've got a slide about this later. You'll notice there is no nitrogen given in our soil test results, but nitrogen is one of the key things that we need, one of the key nutrients we need for plants. Why are they not testing for nitrogen? And the answer really gets down to nitrogen doesn't stay in the soil very well. It likes to change its form. It's going to break down within the soil and change its form to where it's not available to the plant. It's going to become more gaseous, or it may change into another form that a plant can't uptake. And then the other thing is it also likes to move a little bit with water. So sometimes it'll just attach itself to water and move through your soil profile and leach out of your soil because it's attached to water. So it's going to go out with your water. It's going to go out with your air. It's not really going to stay in your soil. So you're just going, like, that's the thing about nitrogen, is you kind of have to add nitrogen every year for your plants if more nitrogen is needed. So again, with this one, lawn grass nitrogen is really your green growth. It's your leafy growth. It's that getting that plant big and green. So lawns need nitrogen. Your leafy greens are going to need nitrogen. If you want your tomatoes to be big, get a lot of a lot of size to them, nitrogen is going to be important. So nitrogen is that factor in that green growth on that plant. And with that, we then also need that root establishment. And then for some plants need to get to that reproduction. So we want to increase some of those potassium levels as well. Oh, I must have grabbed the wrong one because I know I had a few more slides in here, but oh, there we are. See, I knew I had more slides. Again, phosphorus, when we talk about in a corn setting, we've got lots of numbers for corn because Purdue likes to research row crops. We're basically just trying to make sure we're covering, we're in that 15 to 30 parts per million. We want to make sure we get enough phosphorus on to cover what we took off with the corn or what we need. So there's conversion factors. So we can take basically our number that we're at and figure out what we're going to remove and determine that that's how much we need to add. So if in corn, if we're looking at 160 bushels per acre, we're taking off 0.37. Just to maintain that 15 to 30 parts per million, we're going to need to add 60 pounds of phosphorus per year just to maintain that. So again, if your soil tests are above 30 parts per million, we're just going to want to try to reduce applications and draw down from the soil. So if we get really high results from the lab, we want to start working on drawing down those numbers. Whereas also if we're below 15, we might want to work on building those numbers up. So putting on excess nutrient within our system. The next one for potassium, this one really depends on the CEC of the soil. There's kind of some conversion rates. So we want to look at the crop nutrient removed and the yield potential, and then a factor of 20 is added. So this kind of changes again, depending on what your CEC is, what your range is, because if your CEC is higher, you want to have more base level of potassium within your soil. And again, looking at those critical levels, determining based on your critical level for your soil, whether you need to draw down your phosphorus, well, this is phosphorus, but it's potassium, or build up your potassium based on that critical level for your specific soil. And again, just like we talked, nitrogen, it's not included on most of your tests just because it doesn't stay in that soil. So we need to look at nitrogen application. There's two ways to do that. We can look at that agronomic optimum. So, you know, that's considering if I add another pound of nitrogen to my soil, I'm going to produce this much more. And, you know, relating it to yield equals nitrogen application, or nitrogen application equals yield. But that's not always the case. At some point, it just kind of levels off. And then also a lot of our nutrients are expensive, especially this year. We're seeing lots of variation within the market. Prices have gone up, you know, 2-3 times what they normally are because of supply and demand issues with our nutrients. So we also need to look at economically, how much nitrogen should we apply? If you're in a small setting, it may be fine to go ahead and apply your normal rates that equate to large yields or maximizing that green growth. But if you're in a large operation, you may actually look at, especially with corn, looking at adjusting that to where you're at that economic optimum, where you're minimizing your input cost and maximizing the yield. Because it really looks like a curved graph. More nitrogen does not always mean more yield. Eventually you get to a point where you've applied so much that the plant can't take it all up. And that really applies for all of our nutrients. At some point, it levels off. We just have to realize where it levels off based on our soils, based on our crop, and try to find that sweet spot where we're right somewhere in here on that curve, where we're going to get really good yield, but we're also not wasting our money by just applying more nutrient to get that extra bushel that's not going to return anything for us. Here's just another example of kind of looking at the agronomic optimum versus economic optimum at different prices. This is old data, so the prices are even more different. There's probably more of a difference now as we look at, again, increased nutrient costs. And just kind of another example here, if your nitrogen cost is at 20 cents, yeah, it makes maybe a little bit more sense to apply more when our grain prices are high. But when our grain prices are low and our nutrient cost is high, we're going to apply a lot less, looking at more like 172 pounds per acre as opposed to 244 on the other corner of the graph. So just trying to look at that and balance that out and figure out where is it economically best to position yourself with your nutrient application to get good returns without putting on excess nutrient. And just to kind of follow up as that take-home message, really start with the soil test. We really can't do any of this without a soil test. We need to have that soil test to know what our plants need, because without that soil test, we're just going to blindly apply nutrients. And if we don't need to apply that nutrient, you're just wasting money, because what happens if you apply too much? Well, it either A, just sits in the soil and doesn't do you any good, or B, it'll run off, run away, especially if it's surface applied. Nutrients don't like to stay in place, so they're going to move with the water. If they are, even if they're in the ground, there's going to be water that's going to grab them, potentially leach them out a little bit. So making sure you're applying the correct amount, to where you're not too much and you're losing it, and you're not too little and you're losing yield. So again, don't blindly apply. Look at your numbers, do the calculations. Most labs are really good about doing the calculations for you. They'll give you that estimate of what you need for your space. More nutrients doesn't always equal more yield. At some point, the plant can't take up more. It's just physically impossible for that plant to do it. So we really want to look at the data that shows us what our plants need, and just apply and make sure we've got the rates that match your crop or your plant. And then apply the correct rate. Again, it gets back to saving money, making sure that what you apply is used by the crop, making sure you don't do too little, so that you can get more return. I guess if you're in a lawn setting, it really doesn't matter on return, but it still looks nice. So making sure your lawn looks nice by not having too much or too little. So that's kind of really the take-home message in understanding this is, here's all these fancy numbers, here's the important ones you need to look at. And then from there, we can work on figuring out what the application rates are to get those correct applications. And that should be the end of my presentation this time, as opposed to the last one that was in the middle. Everybody is being really quiet, so I hope there's maybe some questions that you have.
So what questions you guys have? I know you have to have thoughts about soil sampling if you've done them. James, very nice presentation. That's a really good explanation of what all the numbers mean. If we over apply phosphorus and nitrogen, what are the environmental harm that can come of that? Can you speak on that?
Yeah, so we sit in a really unique position where we're on I guess sort of a continental divide here in Allen County, where about 2/3 of our county flows into Lake Erie and that watershed. So that one is one where we're concerned about phosphorus because it's a freshwater system. So if we're over applying phosphorus, chances are it's going to be running off, it's going to be leaching out into our water. We've got this wonderful river system. So it just kind of grabs that phosphorus as it leaves your property, and it's going to take it down the river and take it all the way to Lake Erie. Excuse me. And once it gets to Lake Erie, it then, because your plants weren't using it, now the algae in Lake Erie are going to utilize that excess nutrient that they've got. And that's what leads to our algal blooms in Lake Erie. On the other side of our county, on the west side of our county, we flow to the Mississippi River watershed down to the Gulf of Mexico. That is a saltwater system, and nitrogen in that system, basically when that nitrogen gets all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, in a saltwater system, nitrogen is the key nutrient that leads to the algal blooms down in the Gulf of Mexico. So one way or another, it's going to lead to an algal bloom once it gets through that water system. So that's kind of the biggest environmental factor in maintaining good
you see that
good nutrient application.
Yeah, very good. We have all heard about the issues on Lake Erie with drinking water in Toledo. We have a question here in the chat room. Where can we find the agronomic optimums for different types of plants, particularly vegetables? Any comment on that? Anybody?
Yeah, I'm just gonna kind of maybe pass this one off. I'll admit, I'm not a vegetable expert, so I'm not entirely sure. But what I can tell you is that if you contact, I'm going to tell you to contact your extension educator, and here I'm the extension educator, and they can help you identify those, because other land grant universities have done this research and put this together. I would think Cornell, with their vegetable experience, probably has a couple publications related to this that we can find. There may be some stuff in Purdue that I am not familiar with, since I mostly work with row crops, but our horticulture and urban ag educator may have those handy. There may also be some publications from NRCS or Soil and Water that outline some of that. So it's just a matter of contacting me when I'm not presenting, and we can figure out where those where that information is.
I would think some of our viewers here would give us some information. Can anybody answer that? Can anybody talk to that, where they're finding their information from? You can unmute and talk anytime. All right. So James, let's step backwards just a little bit to a previous one, and maybe we can talk about taking a sample and getting them sent to the lab. Can you make any quick comments on that, since we have some time?
Yeah, the biggest thing is taking a sample, making sure you get a good representation of your area. Get a sample. It's always best. I find it's best to do samples in the fall or the spring. Do it before you apply your nutrient, because that's going to just throw it off. And then just make sure that you've got enough time to get your sample to the lab, get results back before you need to purchase nutrients and get them applied. But most of the time with our row crops, we want to sample to a depth of 8 inches when we pull a sample. For a lawn and garden setting, we're usually looking about 4 inches as a depth. But some of our garden plants, like tomatoes, get a really good root system on them, so we may be sampling down to 8 inches in that situation. We always want to make sure we get 2 cups of soil that we take to the lab, and that basically ensures that if this lab needs to resample it or do something with it, they've still got plenty of soil. So getting 2 full cups. The bags that we use at our office have a nice little fill line on them that is 2 cups. But you could also put your soil sample in a Ziploc bag. Just make sure you've got 2 cups in there.
Yep, we have another question on the chat. When is the best time to add elemental sulfur to lower pH?
I think my preference, based on what I've read, fall application is usually a little bit better. It's going to take, it's going to take time. Soil wasn't made in a day. It was made over years and years. So to change your pH, it takes time, several years. But the way sulfur breaks down within your soil and kind of works to change that pH, it does take a little bit for it to dissolve and work into the soil really well. So applying in the fall, giving it that winter to kind of mellow a little bit, gets you so that you're not applying it right to your crop, or you're not applying it and then trying to get this little baby plant in the ground that then will maybe potentially get burned by the any sort of nutrient we use. Because especially if you're using some of these things like sulfur or some of the inorganic fertilizers, you want to make sure that there's not seed to fertilizer contact or baby plant to fertilizer contact, because you can get some of that chemical burn to the plant. So I usually say fall is the best for those reasons.
So are you seeing more sulfur deficiencies as we go along in the years here? I know the Clean Air Act has cleaned up our acid rain, and we're not getting it free anymore through our rain.
Yeah, so I have noticed that pHs are creeping up and creeping up. So the pH is the biggest difference that I'm noticing, especially on smaller scale samples. Some of our large farmers are still in the right pH range. But our small scale and our lawn situations, the pH is just creeping way up. I don't know that I've seen a sulfur deficiency, but Purdue has done some research the last couple of years because that's a question that they have. They've been applying even to corn and soybeans, been applying about 10 pounds of sulfur per acre. They are noticing a visual difference to the plants because they do strip trials where one strip has got the sulfur, one strip doesn't, one strip does, one strip doesn't. They're able to notice a visual difference in the plant. I don't know that it's correlated to a significant yield difference, but visually the plants are a different shade of green. They look healthier. So we may not necessarily be seeing deficiencies in sulfur, but it can still be a factor in that pH is being affected.
Great. Joelle Beals is in our office here, and she has some thoughts on an urban and small farms program that she operates or she manages. You want to speak to this, Joelle?
Yeah, and you're still going to be seeing Mike's face because I'm using his microphone as well. But like Mike said, I'm Joelle Neff, and I'm the lead on our urban and small farms program that we have here with Allen County Soil and Water Conservation District, which is a mouthful, I know. But this program offers technical assistance and particularly soil testing to urban farmers, small farmers, and gardeners, and community gardens within that Western Lake Erie basin. So where our snow melt and rainwater that goes to Lake Erie. So if you're interested in a soil test or interested in talking about mulching or any kind of soil health, or just want to get to know us in case you think maybe in the future we might be able to help you, give us a call and we'd love to do a site visit. We'd love to come out and also take a soil test. I also want to add, I believe that Jamie Perry is on the call. And so is Marianne Rodriguez. They have a statewide program that doesn't necessarily offer soil testing, but they offer technical assistance, and would love to answer any kind of questions that you might have. Jamie, do you want to speak about your program if you're still on? No. Okay, I think he jumped off, but give our office a call. Even if you're not in the Western Lake Erie Basin, give us a call and we'll be able to help answer any questions.
So I think that probably most of the participants today or the viewers are more vegetable and fruit oriented. So the soil sampling to get balanced nutrients and nutrient dense products is very important. Any comments on that one, James? Can you speak as the master gardener?
I don't have a whole lot of comments because again, I'm not the vegetable expert, but yes, maintaining the right nutrients, because especially our vegetable crops tend to see different and maybe more extensive nutrient issues than most of our other crops. Usually we just see corn and soybeans get an NP or K deficiency, but our vegetable crops tend to see other deficiencies, and they also exhibit some of those nutrient deficiencies a lot more commonly. So I know, like, we've seen several early tomato plants coming in right now with some purpling leaves. which kind of indicates phosphorus deficiencies. So those are some things there. I did put in the chat a link to our soil sample on our website. We do have information on soil samples because if you don't qualify for soil and waters sampling program, we do offer soil sampling services through our office. Mostly it's if you bring the soil in, we basically have it analyzed and we provide some technical assistance then on the results and help you understand the results. So there's publications on how to properly take the samples and some of our links to information on the vegetable side of things.
Great. We have another question in the chat room. Please explain how an application of lime affects the soil. So we're talking calcium there.
Yeah, so lime, when we're talking pH, lime is the calcium application. It's just lime is just a form of calcium, comes from limestone usually. And then sulfur is the opposite effect. So if we need to lower or raise the pH, so if say our pH is at a 5.5, we need to get back to that optimum range of 6 to 7 for a pH. We would apply a lime application, and that's going to neutralize the acidity of the soil. Whereas on the opposite side, if we're above 7, we usually want to bring that down a little bit. So we add sulfur, and that adds to the acidity of the soil because sulfur is an acid, calcium is a base. They kind of work to level it that way. So other things that also include calcium, especially if people have chickens, eggshells are calcium. So that does also affect the pH level. So if you're taking a nice, wonderful soil sample from around your yard, but then you're just putting a bunch of eggshells directly on 1 or 2 of your plants or something, you can be, isolated way changing the pH there and affecting how that plant's growing. So that could, if you see some issues, that could be the issue is your sample represents that whole space, but you're changing one tiny part of that we're not able to capture. So those are some things to keep in mind, some common issues that I've seen with homeowners.
Different types of lime also may be higher in magnesium or lower in magnesium, depending on where the source is. So that's back to your magnesium sample.
Yeah, and different types of lime and different types of sulfur also break down at different rates. So they kind of also affect the soil at a different time frame than maybe a different one would. So
I think Joelle has a couple more things for us.
Hey, James, I have a soil sample from one of our gardeners. I took up all of the information, but I was wondering if you could quickly walk us through, you get a soil test, which you already did, but maybe a different look at what a soil test would look like.
Yeah.
And just walk us through, what would you say for this? It's a 5-foot by 12-foot raised bed garden. And so based off of knowing that, how would you read this soil test and kind of lead the person?
Yeah, so again, we're going to kind of go across. The organic matter is pretty high, actually to a point where I would, you might want to watch how some of these different interactions go with different things because that organic matter is high. One thing I notice is if you have something that's really high in carbon, which organic matter is, it can tend to tie up your nitrogen because if you just go out and put a bunch of mulch or leaves or straw that's really high in carbon, and as it breaks down, it needs nitrogen to break down. The bacteria need the nitrogen to help break down that carbon, decompose it. The bacteria will actually steal the nitrogen from the plants. So you might just want to watch if you're really high in some of that dead leafy material. You may need more nitrogen within your soil. So that's maybe the first thing that I would consider, not knowing, again, the specific example here. Then I'm going to see that phosphorus level. So most likely, as again, our recommendation down here is, especially to get things started and get a good root growth, to get a good healthy plant that's able to withstand drought, to, you know, find the water in the soil, be happy, find those nutrients. We're going to need a little bit of phosphorus to get that started. And then potassium is the next one. Again, if we're looking at vegetable production, we're probably looking at some flowering plants, getting some reproduction in there with fruit, with seeds. So potassium is going to be important. Our soil pH is 7.1, so it's a little high. So I might work in some sulfur in the fall. If I was getting this back this spring, I'm not too concerned. Maybe at the 7.1, I'd go ahead and plant. We're within, you know, we're close enough to the range. But I would definitely try to work in some sulfur in the fall the next couple of years, just to try to bring that pH back down to a more optimal level. And then at the bottom, it shows you again those fertility recommendations in pounds per 1,000 square feet. So in this, I think you said we were a 5 by 12. So we are 60 square feet. So we're going to multiply these numbers by 0.06. So 4 times 0.06. We really are only going to need to apply like a quarter to a half a pound of nitrogen in the space. You know, just trying to bring those numbers down, because 1,000 square feet is the lowest area that they're going to tell you. So yeah, if you've got 1,000, if you're growing in a perfect 1,000 square feet, then you can just take these numbers directly. But if you're not, you need to do the math and kind of work down to your size. So you're going to then also, with that, that's pounds. When you go to the store and buy your nutrient, the number that's on the bag is actually a percentage. So if you see a 10, 10, 10 on a fertilizer bag, that means it's 10% nitrogen, 10% phosphorus, 10% potassium. So if it's a 10-pound bag, that means you've got a pound of nitrogen, a pound of phosphorus, a pound of potassium. So you would want to make sure that you do those conversions when you purchase, and do those conversions correctly. Otherwise, again, you're going to be over applying or under applying your nutrient. And again, with this situation, we don't have a perfect force. You know, we're at 477. It's not like it's 444 across there as the recommendation. So chances are we can't just buy a 10, 10, 10 fertilizer. We would maybe buy the 10, 10, 10 to meet our nitrogen need, but then we're going to maybe have to buy some rock phosphate or some more potash as an additional nutrient to apply to get our other two things at the level we need them. Which that's a whole nother like math lesson, is doing conversions on some of these nutrients and fertilizers.
Yeah, that to have an organic matter that high, that is compost and compost heaven there or some reason.
Yeah, there's got to be a lot of compost. Sometimes when I see, and you want to make sure when you take your sample that you're not getting a lot of the surface material, where like if you've got dead leaves on the surface, or if you've got grass in your lawn, not getting much of the grass. You want to try to get as little of that surface material as possible so that you're really getting the true growing medium in your soil sample.
Good point. Anybody else have some questions? What questions do you have? We're getting close to the end here. I want to make a pitch for our next virtual meeting on May 17th, 2020, again on the Tuesday. It's going to be coffee and mulching. So maybe Joel will have to bring that soil test up again. And we can use that one as an example of maybe over mulching. And that's going to be by Jamie Perry with the Indiana Association Soil Water Conservation Districts. He's a regional soil health specialist. So he's in Fort Wayne here, and he will be very interesting to get that on. He was on at the beginning. He must have dropped off. Any final comments, Joelle or anybody?
All I have is thank you all for coming.
Okay,
And thank you so much, James. I learned a whole lot, and I know everyone else did too.
very nice. You want to tell us where your office is in Fort Wayne? Maybe some people aren't familiar. Just
Yeah, if you're not familiar, the extension office is located on the Purdue Fort Wayne campus. We're just there on the east side on Crescent Avenue by the walking bridge over the road. There's some beautiful display gardens maintained by the master gardeners. So they're doing all sorts of different things there that you're welcome to come see. Hopefully this summer we'll also have a bee enclosure for people to see honeybees out there working. So that's where we're located. You can come to us for resources. We've got a website with resources as well. And then, yeah, that's, I guess, where our office is.
Good. And the Allen County Soil and Water Conservation District, we have a lot of programs here available. Joelle's available, so that you can find us on our website, Allen County SWCD. It's another great resource to get you going along. So this will be available, this virtual meeting on the website as soon as Joelle gets it downloaded into that. So you can also see all the others that we've done. So you're all welcome to do it. So I'll say thank you for everybody attending, and join us on May 17th again, and we'll talk about mulching.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, James.